Why did the laughter stop the moment she stepped into the fog? No one could quite explain it later. They would say it was just before dawn, or the cold, or the way the fog clung to the ground like something alive. But the truth was simpler. Something about her presence unsettled them. 15 candidates stood in formation, boots planted in frozen dirt, rucks biting into shoulders already sore with ambition. The air was sharp enough to burn. Breath rose in white clouds and disappeared. And in the middle of them stood a woman who looked like she had wandered into the wrong story. She was smaller than most of them. Civilian clothes, wire-rimmed glasses, a clipboard held close to her chest like armor that wouldn't stop anything real. When Sergeant First Class Derek Rawlings looked at her, he didn't see a threat. He saw inconvenience, a disruption, something soft in a hard place. "Try to keep up," he said, voice loud enough for everyone to hear. "We'll send a jeep back when you quit." A ripple of laughter followed. It wasn't cruel, not exactly. It was worse than that, it was certain. She didn't respond. Instead, she adjusted the straps on her ruck with quiet precision. The pack was heavier than regulation. She felt it immediately. Someone had added weight. Stones, maybe. Concrete. Sabotage disguised as tradition. A test within the test. She said nothing. That silence, calm, unbothered, was the first thing no one understood. They didn't notice how she settled the load against her spine, redistributing weight the way someone does when they've learned the cost of mistakes. They didn't notice the way her eyes moved, not darting, not nervous, just cataloging. Faces, gaits, breathing patterns, weaknesses that hadn't revealed themselves yet. She had been underestimated before, many times, enough that it no longer hurt, enough that it had become useful. The march began. Boots hit dirt in rhythm. The fog swallowed them whole. For the first mile, no one looked back. By the second, irritation crept in. She was still there, still moving, still silent. By the third, something else joined the irritation, unease. Because she wasn't struggling. Her breathing never broke rhythm. Her stride didn't shorten. While others fought the weight, she carried it like memory, heavy, familiar, accepted. She moved like someone who knew pain well enough not to argue with it. When the first candidate fell out, twisting an ankle on a hidden route, she didn't slow. She didn't gloat. She simply passed, eyes forward, expression unreadable. At the first water halt, while others collapsed or cursed or laughed too loudly, she knelt and unlaced her boot. 3 seconds, check the ankle. 2, the arch. 1 each for the toes. Then the boot was back on. The medic noticed. He always noticed things others missed, the way her hands moved, the efficiency, the lack of wasted motion. "Where'd you learn that?" he asked. She looked up neutral, online. It was almost convincing. The march continued. The terrain worsened. Roots, mud, rising water. Confidence began to leak out of the formation, one quiet doubt at a time, the kind no one admits out loud. And still she moved. When the youngest candidate's leg seized in a violent cramp, he cried out in panic. The medic was steps away, but she was already there, fingers pressed into a precise point, hard, controlled. "Breathe," she said quietly. "Don't fight it." The cramp released. She stood before anyone could thank her. Somewhere deep inside, something old stirred, a memory of being broken, of someone else kneeling beside her once, telling her to breathe, telling her she wasn't done yet. She pushed it down and kept walking. The storm came without warning. One moment the sky was gray, the next it collapsed. Rain hammered the forest, visibility vanished, radios crackled into useless noise, formation dissolved into chaos. The navigator couldn't get a bearing. The instructor couldn't see the trail. Fear slipped in through the cracks. And that was when she stepped forward. 32 degrees, she said, voice calm, cutting through the noise. Follow the water. The ridge is northeast. The trail crosses at the saddle. They stared at her. "Do what you want," she added, already moving. "I'm going that way." One by one they followed. In the swamp a soldier sank fast. Mud swallowed him to the waist. Panic took over. No one knew what to do. She did. Orders came from her like they belonged there. Low, wide, distribute weight, controlled pull. They listened. He lived. No one questioned her after that. By mile 16, she stopped pretending. Her pace increased. She passed them without effort, without malice, just momentum, just truth revealing itself. A young specialist finally ran beside her, breath tearing from his lungs. "I know who you are," he said. She didn't slow. "I saw your picture," he continued. "You made me believe I could be more." She looked at him then, really looked. "Finish strong," she said. "That's what matters." And then she was gone. She crossed the line an hour before the rest. Sat down. Waited. When the instructor finally limped in, broken, furious, humiliated, he asked the only question left. "How long have you been here?" 67 minutes. Silence fell like a held breath. When he grabbed her shoulder, when the fabric tore, when the tattoo was revealed, the world shifted. A skull, a ranger tab, numbers that meant something to the right people. The colonel saluted. Everything changed. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She spoke softly. "You judged before you watched. You decided before you learned. Strength doesn't announce itself, it shows up." She could have ended careers that day. Instead, she offered something harder. A chance to change. Later, as the sun dipped low and helicopters waited, she stood alone again, just as she had that morning. Someone asked what came next. She didn't answer directly. There were always more missions, more places where silence was mistaken for weakness, more people who needed to see what quiet resilience looked like when it finally moved. As the rotors lifted her away, one truth remained behind with them. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts. Why did the silence start to feel heavier than the rucksack on her back? By mile 4, the laughter was gone, not replaced by respect, nothing that generous, but by something tighter, suspicion maybe, or the quiet discomfort that comes when a story refuses to follow its script. The forest closed in as the trail narrowed. Fog thinned just enough to reveal shapes, tree trunks slick with moisture, exposed roots like traps waiting for tired feet. Boots struck uneven ground. The rhythm broke. Breathing changed. She noticed all of it. She always did. Pain lived in patterns. Fatigue had a language. And the human body, when pushed, told the truth long before the mouth ever did. She stayed in the middle of the formation now, not pushing ahead, not falling back, invisible again the way she had learned to be when visibility was dangerous, when being noticed got people killed. A voice behind her cracked into frustration, someone stumbling, someone angry at their own legs for betraying them. She didn't turn. Not yet. Up front, Rawlings set a pace that felt personal now, not tactical, not measured, punitive, the kind of speed meant to break pride before bodies failed. His jaw was clenched, old injury barking with every downhill step, though he'd never admit it. He told himself he was proving a point. He didn't realize he was revealing one. The swamp loomed ahead like a held breath, dark water, mud that didn't release what it took, the kind of terrain that punished panic. She remembered another swamp, different continent, different year, night so thick it pressed against her eyes, the sound of insects so loud it drowned out radio chatter, a teammate's hand gripping her vest in the dark so hard it bruised. Focus. She brought herself back. The first creek crossing took knees from men who thought strength was loud. Cold water surged, stole balance, numbed thought. Some laughed through it, forced, brittle. Others cursed. She crossed last. Didn't use a stick, didn't test every step. She read the water, diagonal line, stable footing hidden beneath current. Dry above the shin. The medic noticed again. He was starting to see her the way she didn't want to be seen, the way professionals see professionals. That came with consequences. At mile 7, the youngest candidate went down. The sound wasn't dramatic, just a sharp intake of breath and a cry that slipped out before he could stop it. His leg seized, muscle locking so violently it bowed him forward. Panic rose fast. It always did when the body betrayed the will. She moved before anyone called for help. Kneeling beside him, she pressed hard, exactly where it would hurt, exactly where it needed to. "Breathe," she said. "Slow, you're not broken." He believed her. That mattered more than the technique. When she stood, the medic was watching openly now. "That's not civilian knowledge," he said. She met his eyes, calm, empty. You'd be surprised what people learn when they don't want to die. It wasn't an answer. It wasn't a lie either. By mile 10, the storm clouds were stacking. The sky darkened with intent. Wind threaded through the trees, carrying the smell of rain and something electric beneath it. The formation slowed. Fatigue had settled in deep now, not sharp but heavy. The kind that made simple decisions harder. The kind that turned arrogance into desperation. Someone finally asked the question no one wanted to voice. "Why is she still fine?" No one answered. At the checkpoint, she drank slowly, methodical, not desperate, not rushed. She watched hands shake as canteens spilled, watched eyes avoid her. Rawlings avoided, looking at her altogether now. "Good," she thought, "let it bother you." The storm hit like an ambush. Rain slammed down so hard it erased distance. Sound turned into chaos. Orders dissolved midair. Radios screamed static. Training became survival. The navigator froze, compass useless, visibility gone. Rawlings shouted anyway, authority without clarity. It didn't work. Fear slid in. That was when she stepped forward. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't posture. She simply spoke. And people listened. Because fear recognizes certainty. She moved first, into the storm, into uncertainty, and somehow that mattered more than rank. When the swamp tried to take one of them for good, she didn't hesitate. She never did. Hesitation was what got people buried. Orders came from her mouth without permission. They sounded right, felt right, they were right. They saved a life. No one argued after that. By mile 14, Rawlings was limping badly. His pride was bleeding through the cracks now, seeping into every step. He hated that she saw it. She hated that she understood it. She moved beside him briefly. "Keep moving," she said quietly. "Stopping will make it worse." "I don't need your help," he snapped. She didn't argue. She never argued with pain. Pain always won. She pulled ahead. The rain eased near mile 15. Not mercy, just pause, enough to let the damage be felt. Bodies shook with cold now. Muscles trembled on descents. The trail was slick, unforgiving. She assessed the remaining candidates the way she always did, not as numbers, as people. The quiet one would finish, the angry one might not. The woman Hazel was stronger than she knew. That mattered. She wondered briefly what Hazel might become if no one crushed that strength before it learned its own name. At mile 16, she let go of the last restraint. She accelerated. The effect was immediate, demoralizing, impossible to ignore. Men tried to follow, failed. Pride burned hotter than muscles. She felt the weight in her pack shift. The extra stones knocked once against her spine. A reminder, a test layered on a test. She welcomed it. Pain was familiar. It grounded her, gave her something honest to hold. A vehicle pulled alongside her, a face she trusted, a voice from another life. "You're enjoying this," it said. Maybe, she answered. She pushed harder. By mile 17, one of them caught up, young, earnest, eyes sharp despite exhaustion. He told her he knew. She didn't deny it. She didn't confirm it either. Finish, she told him, that's your job. It was always the job. She crossed the line alone. Time meant nothing to her anymore. It had stopped being a measure of worth a long time ago. She sat, waited. When they finally arrived, one by one she watched realization dawn, watched identities fracture, watched assumptions die. When Rawlings asked how long she'd been there, the truth landed like a round to the chest. 67 minutes. The rest unraveled fast after that. The grab, the tear, the ink exposed to daylight. She saw the exact moment his certainty collapsed, the moment belief became doubt, doubt became understanding. She didn't feel triumph. She felt tired. When the colonel saluted, she returned it automatically. Muscle memory, reflex, no emotion. Rank was a tool, not an identity. When she spoke, her voice stayed even. You decided who I was before I moved, she said. That's not leadership. She could have said more. She didn't need to. Because the lesson wasn't in her words. It was in the silence that followed. And in that silence, something uncomfortable took root. The idea that strength had been standing in front of them all along. Quiet, patient, waiting to be seen. Why did the truth feel heavier than the miles they had already walked? It settled over the finish area slowly, not like thunder, but like fog creeping back in after everyone thought it was gone. No one spoke. Even the men who had always filled silence with jokes or bravado stood still, unsure where to put their hands, their eyes, their thoughts. She stood among them, finally visible in a way she had never asked for. The tattoo was no longer a secret. Ink carried history, pain, names that never made it into official reports. She felt the familiar tightening in her chest, the reflexive instinct to pull away, to disappear back into anonymity. Exposure was dangerous. It always had been. Rawlings stared at her like a man waking up in the wrong life. You're a master sergeant, he said, voice hollow. She didn't correct his tone. Rank wasn't the point, it never had been. The colonel's voice cut clean through the tension, formal, controlled, final. Her words landed with the weight of documentation, of records that didn't forget. Decorations, deployments, years of service that had quietly eclipsed every man standing there. Faces changed. Shock softened into shame. Pride cracked. Some men looked away. Others looked at the ground as if the dirt might swallow them and spare them from what they were feeling. The young one, the kid from Kansas, looked at her like she had rewritten gravity. Hazel didn't look surprised. That mattered. Rawlings tried to speak again. His body betrayed him first. His knee gave out, metal screaming under skin, and he dropped, not ceremonially, not symbolically, but because he had nothing left. She watched him kneel. She felt no satisfaction. Only a dull ache behind her ribs, the familiar weight of knowing how easily power corrupted certainty, how often authority confused itself with truth. He asked if he hadn't seen it. She answered honestly. Because you weren't looking. The words weren't sharp. They didn't need to be. Reality was doing the cutting for her. She could have walked away then. Let the consequences roll downhill on their own momentum. That would have been easier, cleaner. But easy had never changed anything. When the colonel announced the review, names spoken aloud like verdicts, fear surfaced openly. Careers hung in the air, fragile as breath in cold weather. Then she spoke again. Not loudly. Not for drama. I have another recommendation. Head snapped toward her. This was the moment they expected: judgment, punishment, retribution dressed up as accountability. She surprised them. Make them go through it, she said, all of it as candidates. Disbelief rippled outward. Rawlings looked up stunned. "You want us to feel it," she said. "Not observe it, not design it, live it." Silence followed, thick and uneasy. She continued, voice steady. "You can't teach empathy from a position of comfort. You can't lead people you don't understand. And you can't understand what you've never been forced to endure." She wasn't angry. That scared them more. The colonel considered it, long enough that doubt crept in, then nodded. Approved. The decision settled like a verdict that couldn't be appealed. Somewhere inside her something loosened. Not relief, not victory, just the quiet satisfaction of choosing growth over destruction. As the formation broke, they approached her one by one. The woman first. Hazel stood tall despite exhaustion, eyes bright with something fierce. "I want to try," she said, "for Ranger School." The words carried fear, hope, resolve, all tangled together. She handed Hazel a card, no speech, no promise, just a path. "Do it for yourself," she said, "and for the ones who haven't arrived yet." Hazel nodded once, sharp, certain. The kid followed. He thanked her like it mattered, like it would echo into the rest of his life. She believed him. Some gratitude was performative, his was. "Finish," she told him again. "You did that." That was enough. The officer came next, apologetic, earnest, afraid. She didn't offer forgiveness. She offered expectation. "Be better when no one's watching," she said. He swallowed, "Yes, ma'am." The navigator came, humbled, curious, wanting to learn instead of prove. That she respected. Then the golden one, the one with the famous name, the easy confidence stripped bare. "Connections," she told him, "open doors, but they don't carry weight." He nodded like someone hearing truth, without armor for the first time. Finally, the saboteur. The boy shaking in his boots, regret crashing into him too late to stop what he'd already done. "You could have killed someone," she said flatly. He knew. She saw it in his eyes. She gave him a way forward anyway. Not absolution. Responsibility. When Rawlings approached last, humility sat on him awkwardly, like a uniform that didn't quite fit yet. He apologized, for today, for years, for things he was only just beginning to understand. She listened. Then she said the only thing that mattered. "What you do next is the truth." He offered his hand, not dominance, not entitlement, just soldier to soldier. She shook it. Not because he deserved forgiveness. Because change had to start somewhere. As the sun dipped low, the helicopter arrived. Rotors cut the air, familiar and impersonal. Another mission waited. She stood at the edge of the field, watching them disperse. Watching something shift, not perfectly, not permanently, but enough to matter. Someone asked her what came next. She didn't answer. Some truths weren't meant to be explained. They were meant to be lived. As she lifted off, leaving dust and exhaustion behind, one thought followed her into the noise and wind. Strength doesn't announce itself. It endures. And when it finally moves, it changes everything. Why did the quiet after the helicopters left feel more dangerous than the storm that came before? Because silence leaves room for memory. The field emptied slowly. Engines faded. Boots stopped moving. What remained wasn't relief, it was reflection. The kind that presses in when adrenaline drains away and the truth finally has space to breathe. She didn't leave with the others. Not yet. She stood alone near the tree line, the place where the forest swallowed sound, where so many things began and ended without witnesses. The wind tugged gently at her torn shirt, now patched with borrowed tape, the Ranger ink once again hidden. But the exposure lingered. You couldn't unsee something like that. You couldn't unknow it. That was the cost of stepping forward. For years she had survived by being unseen. Ghost wasn't just a call sign, it was a strategy. Disappear, Move clean, leave no trace, let the mission speak instead of you. Today, she had broken that rule. And part of her hated it. Another part, quieter, harder to admit, knew it had been necessary. She sat on a fallen log and finally let the weight settle. Not the ruck, the other weight. The one that came from watching people confront versions of themselves they had spent years protecting. Rawlings' face stayed with her. Not the arrogance from the morning, not the anger from the finish. The look after. A man realizing the story he had told himself for 14 years was wrong. That kind of realization could break someone, or remake them. She seen both outcomes before. Her phone vibrated once in her pocket. Secure channel, short message, coordinates, timestamp. Found. Her jaw tightened. The past never waited politely. 8 years. That was how long she had lived with the quiet guilt, the kind no metal touched, no citation erased. A team lost in the dark. A mission that ended without closure. Names she carried with her through every mile, every sleepless night, every test of endurance. She had run today with them in her head. She always did. Footsteps approached behind her, familiar, heavy, unhurried. Samuel Hendra stopped beside her, hands on hips, eyes scanning the empty field like he expected it to talk back. "You shook the place," he said. She didn't smile, it needed it. He studied her for a moment. "You okay?" That was his way of asking everything at once. She nodded, a small lie, an acceptable one. "You could have ended careers," he continued. "No one would have blamed you." She looked out toward the trailhead where the march had begun. "Ending people is easy," she said. "Building them is." He grunted, half agreement, half respect. They stood there until the light shifted, until the day officially let go of them. Then the helicopter's distant thrum grew louder. She rose smoothly, instinctively. No hesitation, no drama. Samuel watched her adjust her pack, lighter now but still worn like it belonged there. "You always run toward the hard things," he said. "Someone has to." "You know this one won't be clean," he warned. 8 years hidden doesn't happen by accident." "I know. And they'll expect you." "I hope they do." The helicopter touched down, grass flattening beneath its force. Wind whipped around them, carrying dust, old leaves, and the scent of fuel. Familiar, comforting in a strange way. Before she climbed in, Samuel spoke again. "What you did today," he said, "it mattered." She paused, one foot on the skid. "It only matters if it lasts." He nodded. "It will. You planted something." She climbed aboard. As the aircraft lifted, the training field shrank below her, just another patch of earth already reclaiming its silence. But she knew better. Change rarely announced itself. It hid. It waited. It grew quietly in places people didn't think to look. The helicopter banked east. Her mind shifted gears the way it always did. Emotional compartments closed. Mission focus slid into place. Breathing slowed. Heart rate steadied. But one thing slipped through before the walls sealed again. Hazel's face. The way her eyes had lit up, not with awe but with permission. "You can try." That was the real victory of the day. Hours later, in a secured facility that smelled like disinfectant and recycled air, she studied satellite imagery projected across a wall. Grainy shapes, shadows where people shouldn't exist. "Confirmation isn't solid yet," an analyst said. "Could be misinformation." "It isn't," she replied. They looked at her differently now, not as an anomaly, as an authority. She hated that too. "What makes you sure?" someone asked. "Because hope doesn't come back from the dead unless someone buried it alive," she thought. But she didn't say that. Instead, she pointed to a pattern on the screen, subtle, intentional. "They wanted to be found," she said, "just not by everyone." Silence followed. A commander cleared his throat. "If this is real, We're talking about reopening one of the most sensitive losses on record. She folded her arms. Then you'd better send the right person. They exchanged glances, decisions made without words. You're already cleared, the commander said finally. She nodded once. Of course she was. Later, alone in the prep room, she tightened straps and checked gear with the same ritual she'd followed for years. Each movement deliberate, grounding. In the mirror, she caught her own reflection. Civilian clothes gone now, uniform back where it belonged. The ghost staring back looked older than she felt, or maybe younger. It was hard to tell when time bent around trauma. She touched the spot where the tattoo hid beneath fabric. Once it had been a symbol of belonging, then of loss. Today it had become something else. A reminder that the fight wasn't just out there, in jungles or deserts or classified coordinates. Sometimes it was right in front of you. In assumptions, in culture, in quiet dismissals that shaped who was allowed to try. She turned away from the mirror. The aircraft waited. The mission waited. But somewhere behind her, on a muddy training field, a handful of people were beginning to understand something they had missed their entire careers. That strength doesn't always look like power. Sometimes it looks like restraint. Sometimes it looks like patience. Sometimes it looks like a woman standing alone in the fog, saying nothing at all, until the moment comes when action is the only language left. Why did the night feel familiar before she could explain why? The rotors cut through the darkness, steady and indifferent, and with every mile the world narrowed. Training fields, faces, conversations, those things fell away. What remained was movement, breath, and the quiet mathematics of risk. She watched the lights of the city fade beneath them, replaced by long stretches of nothing that felt almost merciful. She preferred this phase, transit, the moment before truth demanded a price. Across from her, no one spoke. They never did on flights like this. Words had a way of getting in the way of focus. She checked her gear by feel alone, eyes closed, fingers confirming what memory already knew. Knife, radio, spare battery, the small, folded photograph tucked into an inner pocket. She didn't look at it. She didn't need to. 8 years ago, the mission had ended in confusion. Bad weather, worse intelligence. A choice made in seconds that echoed for years. She had survived it. Others hadn't. One had vanished into the space between certainty and hope, officially listed as unrecovered, unofficially treated as gone. Except hope had a stubborn way of resurfacing. The coordinates pulsed on her tablet like a quiet accusation. Someone wanted something found, or forgiven, or finished. As the helicopter descended, she felt the old tightening behind her ribs. Not fear, readiness. The body remembering what the mind refused to dwell on. They touched down far from anything that looked like safety. The air smelled of damp earth and smoke, layered with something metallic she couldn't place. The team moved fast, clean, shadows folding into shadows. She led. Not because of rank. Because everyone there knew she carried more than orders into this place. They reached the perimeter just before dawn, structures half swallowed by jungle, a camp abandoned badly like people who'd left in a hurry or never meant to leave at all. Fire pits cold, equipment scavenged, footprints deliberately blurred. Someone wanted time. She crouched, studied the ground, traced a pattern invisible to anyone who hadn't learned to read absence. The way debris was arranged, the direction of the drag marks, the deliberate mess. They doubled back, she whispered. They want us searching where they're not. A pause. Then quiet agreement. They adjusted course. Hours passed without incident, which made her uneasy. Trouble rarely announced itself honestly. It waited until attention drifted, until fatigue softened edges. They moved deeper. When the first shot cracked the morning open, it missed her by inches. She dropped instinctively, rolled, came up behind cover that barely deserved the name. The return fire was measured, not frantic, not personal. Professional. Her mind sharpened instantly. This wasn't a trap set for strangers. This was for her. They pushed through the engagement quickly, decisively. No bravado, no shouting, just efficiency and motion until the threat dissolved into retreat. Afterward, she didn't chase. She knew better. They followed the trail again, slower now, senses tuned to the subtle wrongness of things that didn't want to be seen. The jungle thinned near a ridge, and that was where she felt it, the pull in her chest, the sense of walking into something unfinished. A figure stood near the edge. Not armed, not running, waiting. Time collapsed. Her breath caught, sharp and unprofessional, before discipline reasserted itself. She raised a hand, stopped the team without turning around. The figure turned. Older, leaner, scarred in places she remembered, intact, but unmistakable. Alive. Her throat closed. 8 years of restraint strained at once. He didn't smile. Neither did she. "You took your time," he said. His voice was rougher, still familiar, still capable of pulling her backward through memory with terrifying ease. "You disappeared," she replied. "Someone had to." They stood there, two ghosts acknowledging each other in the open, while the world held its breath around them. The team stayed frozen, professionals but human, witnessing something they didn't have context for and knew better than to interrupt. "Why now?" she asked finally. "Because I'm tired," he said, "and because you're the only one who'd come without turning this into a spectacle." She almost laughed, almost. "You're wrong," she said. "I brought people." He nodded. "I know, that's why I waited." They spoke quietly, fragments filling in gaps that had haunted her for years. A capture disguised as death, a choice to stay buried to prevent something worse, a lie that grew too heavy to carry alone. She listened, not as a soldier, as someone who had lived with the cost. When it was done, when the truth lay bare between them like an open wound, she felt something loosen inside her chest. Not closure, but release. The end of a question that had never stopped asking itself. Extraction was messy. It always was when reality replaced theory, but they made it out. In the helicopter, as the ground fell away, he closed his eyes like a man finally allowing himself to rest. She watched him, careful not to let her guard drop entirely. Habit, survival. "You never gave up," he said quietly. "No," she answered. "I just learned how to carry it." Back at base, paperwork waited. Debriefs. Controlled language designed to contain something uncontrollable. She navigated it with practiced detachment. But later, alone, the weight returned. Different now, still heavy. She thought of the training field. Of Hazel. Of Rawlings. Of how quickly people decided who mattered. The world loved neat endings, redemption arcs, clean lessons. Real life didn't work that way. Change was slow, uneven, often invisible. But it happened. Sometimes because someone chose restraint over revenge. Sometimes because someone walked instead of talked. Sometimes because someone finished the march an hour early and waited without demanding applause. As she finally lay down, exhaustion pulling her under, one truth settled gently instead of cutting. Strength wasn't loud. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need permission. It endured long enough to make space for others to follow. And somewhere far behind her now, a young woman was lacing her boots, believing, maybe for the first time, that she belonged on the path ahead. Why did the quiet after everything was finished feel like the hardest part to survive? The base slept in fragments that night. Lights dimmed but never went fully dark. Doors opened and closed without ceremony. Somewhere, a generator hummed like a tired animal refusing to rest. She lay awake on her cot, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sound of her own breathing as if it belonged to someone else. The mission was complete. That was the language they used, clean, final. Her body didn't believe it. Completion suggested an end. Her body knew better. It knew that endings were rarely real, that they were pauses where memory caught up, where the cost arrived late and uninvited. She swung her legs over the side of the cot and stood, joints stiff, muscles still carrying echoes of effort. The room smelled faintly of antiseptic and old fabric. She welcomed it. Neutral smells didn't ask questions. In the small mirror bolted to the wall, she barely recognized herself. Not because she had changed, because she finally saw herself clearly. The ghost had served its purpose. Disappearing had kept her alive, kept others alive. But ghosts couldn't build things. They couldn't teach. They couldn't leave anything behind except questions. She thought of the training field again, not as it had been, but as it might become. A place where someone like Hazel wouldn't have to wait for permission to try, where strength wouldn't be measured by volume or tradition alone. The thought scared her more than any firefight. Because it meant staying. Because it meant being seen. At dawn, she stood on the edge of the tarmac as the sun broke low and pale across the horizon. The air was cool, carrying the promise of heat later. She liked mornings like this. Honest. Uncomplicated. Samuel joined her without announcement. "They're asking about you," he said. She didn't ask who. "Of course they are." He hesitated. "They want you to stay on, officially, training advisory, oversight." She closed her eyes briefly. This was the moment she had always outrun. "No more disappearing," he added gently. "No more showing up only when things go wrong." She exhaled slowly. "You make it sound simple." "It isn't," he said, "but it matters." She watched a group of new candidates jog past the far fence, their cadence uneven, their optimism still intact. She recognized herself in none of them. And in all of them. "What if I'm not what they expect?" she asked. Samuel smiled faintly. "You never were." That helped more than she expected. Later that morning, she stood in front of a room that buzzed with low conversation and restless energy. Faces turned toward her, curious, cautious, guarded. No one laughed. No one mocked. They waited. She didn't start with her resume. She didn't start with rules. She started with a question. "Why are you here?" Silence answered first, then fragments: duty, legacy, challenge, escape, something to prove. She nodded at each response. "None of those are wrong," she said, "but they're not enough, not when things get hard, not when no one's watching." She let the words sit. "I can't make you strong," she continued. "I can only show you what strength actually costs." She told them about the march, not the finish, the waiting, the choice to help instead of surge ahead, the decision to speak when silence would have been safer. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. They listened differently than the last group had. Maybe the field had already begun to change. Weeks passed. She stayed. The days filled with small corrections, quiet guidance, moments that would never make headlines. She watched confidence build and collapse and rebuild stronger. She watched arrogance fail and humility learn. She corrected gently, firmly, fairly. Some resisted. Some flourished. One evening, Hazel found her at the track, boots slung over her shoulder, face flushed with effort and something brighter. "I made it through the first cut," she said, trying not to sound like it mattered too much. "It mattered." "That's good," she replied. "How do you feel?" Hazel considered, terrified but capable. She smiled then, a real one, brief, honest. "That's the right balance." As Hazel jogged off, she felt something settle inside her, a sense of continuity she had never allowed herself to imagine. The past didn't disappear. It never would. She still woke some nights with names on her tongue and questions in her chest. She still carried the weight of choices made under pressure that no one else would ever fully understand. But the weight no longer crushed her. It anchored her. On the anniversary of the march, she returned to the trail alone. Fog hung low again, familiar and quiet. She walked the first mile slowly, remembering how it felt to be unseen, how it felt to move anyway. At mile 4, she stopped. Listened. The forest breathed around her, indifferent but present. She closed her eyes and let the silence settle without trying to escape it. She understood something then, not as a lesson, but as a truth earned over years of endurance. Strength wasn't proven in moments of triumph. It was revealed in moments of restraint, in the choice to wait, to carry, to return. She turned back before the finish line, content to leave some things unfinished. Not everything needed closure. Some things needed continuity. As she walked away, the fog thinned, light breaking through in soft, unremarkable beams. And if anyone had been watching, if anyone had expected a speech or a salute or some final declaration, they would have been disappointed. Because dignity didn't announce itself. It didn't demand recognition. It showed up quietly, day after day, in the work of becoming better and making space for others to do the same. Sometimes dignity doesn't speak. It simply acts.